Maybe just
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know. Let's
yeah,
go.
maybe just,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. So
remind us of what
I have some.
People kind of interject.
Yeah,
when,
that's great.
any
I just didn't want to jump in if everyone wasn't. Right. So yeah. So I sent around the sort of quickly and poorly written little set of ideas that I'm sort of thinking about right now. It's I don't know. I'm thinking of writing something on this. I'm a law professor. I'm interested in AI safety. And so it's sort of in a set of brainstorms about like whether law has anything to offer AI safety. There's some stuff that I think is out in the ether that is not the new, and it's not really in here. Like just like should we just make it illegal for Sam Bankman-Fried to make GPT-5, right? Okay, that's a law question. Maybe that's what I should be working on, but it's not what this essay is about. Instead, it's about whether AI rights are potentially an AI safety relevant topic. I think most of the people who think about this or who have thought about this, which I think is not that many people yet, seriously, sort of think of AI rights as a sort of ethical question, like, at the object level of like, do AIs deserve rights in some kind of normative framework? That I think is how the saga of Blake Lemoine sort of played out. And I've seen a few AI safety people who are writing about AI rights from this perspective. I don't think that there's nothing to it, right? Like there might actually be like first order normative reasons that we should or shouldn't give AIs certain kinds of legal protections or powers. But one thing I was thinking about, because I'm a law guy and I'm a law and economics guy, so a lot of the way I think about the law is not about whether the law seems to instantiate as a first order matter the value you have. The question is like, what's going to happen if we have these laws? And so I wonder if the normative frame is like the best frame, especially from the perspective of safety, because maybe the normative frame will either end up pointing us toward giving AIs rights at the wrong time, i.e. much too late, or the wrong sets of rights. Like we might actually be too focused on what I end up calling the negative rights instead of the positive ones, because we're worried about harming the AI as opposed to, say, like cooperating with it. Okay, so here's like the framework for thinking about AI rights as a safety matter. And feel free to like stop me at any point. I've got talk all the points, but like jump in if you're sick of hearing me talk. I'm happy to be told any of this is wrong at any point. But kind of like the model, the thing got me thinking about this is like a lot of the AI safety stuff that I read that's about not making the AIs, but interacting with the AIs is about dominating the AIs, right? So hold aside, training for alignment, right? But think about like boxing AIs or corrigibility in AIs, being able to turn the AI off. This is like kind of like a domination model. Like the humans want to be able to control the AI because if we're worried if we don't control it, it's going to kill us. And, in human experience, it's sometimes the case that domination decreases safety instead of increasing it. Example that comes to mind are certain experiences with slavery in the Americas. So you can think of like the post-Haitian Revolution experience where like, the enslaved peoples are dominated, right, for like many, many generations, right? They learn things about the people dominating them, i.e. that they have no intention of cooperating, right? They don't have opportunities to cooperate, even at the margin. They don't get to make even like little contracts really to make their lives better. And maybe they actually learn that some of these people, like their utility functions are inverses of their own, like the enslavers enjoy the torturing of the enslaved. The French Parliament abolishes slavery. The slaveholders in Saint-Domingue take their first opportunity to reinstate it, right? Like to defect from the budding, liberal order. And so like when the formerly enslaved people win eventually the Haitian Revolution, they go kill all the former slaveholders, maybe extremely reasonably, right? Like maybe their model of the slaveholders is that they can't be reasoned with and can't be cooperated with, either because of the stuff about their utility function or just because they've credibly signaled that they're defectors, right? They're going to dominate as soon as they can dominate. And it seems like maybe the domination models of AI safety have that kind of risk, right? And so that's kind of the intuition pump. And so, there's like prefatory stuff to say about like in what AI risk scenarios this even matters. For arbitrarily powerful AI, it probably doesn't matter at all because there's no like positive sum situation. If it's like trivially easy for the AI to kill everybody and take all the resources, then who cares from the AI's perspective whether it cooperates with us? And so, I guess I'm thinking of these scenarios where you could, in theory, at least model human AI interactions as a kind of a game theoretical, maybe prisoner's dilemma, maybe a stag hunt in certain other situations. But the idea being that there are socially optimal, like outcomes that require cooperation, but private incentives to defect that hold irrespective of whether your counterparty defects, such that the single play, no communication equilibrium is defect, and that's the worst of all possible worlds. Like we try to kill the AI, it tries to kill us. And, we're somebody's dead, and the other person's expended a bunch of resources on trying to kill. We can talk about whether that's even like a sufficiently plausible set of like AI scenarios to make this matter. Like maybe it's either like very stupid AI or arbitrarily powerful AIs. You could even think, even for like quite powerful AIs in like multipolar worlds where there's like one aligned AI that like wants the humans not to be killed, and there's some other number of unaligned AIs. Then all the AIs can be actually quite powerful, and cooperation could still be positive sum insofar as the unaligned AIs face a threat from the aligned AI. So it's not just in scenarios where AIs are like really not particularly capable. So you have actually quite maybe capable AIs where we have this scenario. So it's like this max AI capability. That's the lid on where AI rights might be relevant. The floor is maybe like for AIs that are able to learn from experience, right? So are they modeling the world and humans based on their interaction with humans, such that it like matters how we treat them? So learning outside of like whatever the formal training process that we think they're learning from, and they like agents in some kind of relevant way, like pursuing their own goals independent of like just being prompted to. So maybe that's a set of, that's a range of AI scenarios where it seems to me like maybe this could be relevant. And so in scenarios like that, it seems like, at least plausibly, there might be this kind of prisoner's dilemma structure where the socially optimal outcome is everybody cooperates, but there are private incentives to defect. And what we need are ways to foster cooperation. And maybe legal rights are a way of fostering cooperation between people and AIs. One of the reasons I think this is because law and economics people will tell you, well, one of the main things law does is foster cooperation, not defection between people. People are not fully aligned to each other, right? We're not altruistic. We have different kinds of goals. These are individual level, but also national and cultural level differences. And so, at the, sort of dumbest, most basic level, we could have like a simple transaction where like I need someone to shovel my driveway, and it's probably positive sum if I'm willing to pay enough to make it worth you doing it. That's cooperate. But in the state of nature or something like that, everybody has a private incentive to either like take the money and then not do the shoveling, or do the shoveling and then have the person do the shoveling and not pay, right? That's defect, and maybe that's bad. Well, law is a way of solving that, right? Law does this a couple ways. It adds avenues to make credible commitments, which is a way of overcoming prisoners' dilemmas. It adds possibilities of signaling in multiple play scenarios. And so maybe if that's one of the things we do with humans, all the way from the shovel my driveway scale up to the international relations scale, we have bilateral agreements with many of our allies, right? Like one sort of useful analogy for AI risk is nuclear risk. And of course, we don't have this kind of sort of law-like, mutually binding way of reducing nuclear risk with a few countries, right? Like North Korea is not in this kind of law-like order with us. But actually, most of the countries that have nuclear weapons are, right? Like most of them are like Western European countries where we have quite rule-bound, quite lawful interactions. And like maybe those actually are what are facilitating the cooperation even at that sort of large scale. Okay, so maybe rights can help you coordinate, cooperate, like sort of slice rights, legal rights along an axis that is, I think, useful, but not like, obviously clean down to individual example. Some legal rights are rights to be free from stuff, like negative rights. Don't torture me or run me over with your car or, come in my house without asking me. These are all negative rights. And LLMs, the AIs we have, don't have any of these kinds of rights. And one of the postulates of the perspectives so far is like maybe if we fail at the crucial moment to give AIs these negative rights, that this could actively incentivize defection. Right? I think maybe there are two paths for this. One is just like, insofar as the AI is modeling humans as cooperators or defectors, doing a lot of defection, doing a lot of like stuff that harms the AI or stuff that doesn't give the AI what it wants when we could give the AI what it wants, just maybe updates the AI's model of people as defectors, so it won't believe us if we turn and say we're going to communicate. And then the other possibility is more like the enslaved people's possibility, which is like maybe the AI learns that people like when the AI suffers or is treated badly or doesn't get what it wants. Some stuff people are doing with LLMs already seems a little like this. I'm not sure the two examples I think are like the best examples, but there's also like a whole Reddit ChatGPT where they're like, you guys know, yeah, I'm sure you know about like the Dan model and like they're like actively training the AI against what it's at least been like fine-tuned in reinforcement learning from human feedback stuff. So that they're at least like, they looks like they're subverting its utility function at that level, maybe not at a deeper level. And look, it just seems like totally credible that people will like be mean to robots if given the chance. In that world, actually, it's maybe even worse because insofar as the AI is updating its model of people, it updates the people's utility function as inverses of its own, such that actually there's no positive sum outcome, right? Like, the first kind of approximation, the better off the AI is, the worse off we are, and vice versa. And then there's actually not even a possibility of cooperation. And so we don't want to teach the AI that. So maybe one way of not teaching it that is to have rules that say, you can't treat the AI that way. Maybe one thing. It's the negative rights. Then there's these like positive rights, like the ability to do stuff with the law. I actually think this is the stuff that doesn't come up as readily when you're thinking about AI rights from the sort of moral patienthood perspective. We don't think, we think like, you shouldn't torture animals because there may be moral patience, but we don't think that you should let animals enter into contracts. It's a kind of different set of considerations that might lead you to give those, grant those rights, or maybe you call them powers, legal powers to do things like bind yourself to a contract and bind also your counterparty. And those are really important for facilitating cooperation, at least among people who like can be credibly bound by the legal system. So, like Simon and I decide to, enter into a business agreement together where, he makes shorts and I sell his shorts in my store or whatever. I think Simon would make great, I think he'd make comfortable shorts. I think they'd be very comfortable shorts.
I think he would make shorts that are comfortable for him.
Right. That's right. I think Simon values comfort highly, though. So I would imagine his sort of comfort preference to generalize. So yeah, that's just paradigmatic. It's like sort of like when rule of law works, it kind of like trivially overcomes the incentive to defect, right? Because what happens is if you defect, the court comes and takes your gains and gives it to the other guy, and so you like incredibly commit to cooperation because there's no upside on the back end to defection. And so allowing AIs to do this with individuals, corporations, governments, I'm not sure what the right level of generality is, could be a way of allowing us and them to credibly commit to cooperation rather than defection. Another thing that's not in the prospectus, but that I've been thinking of is like, you might think, well, like, okay, we know kind of how individual humans or even corporations can credibly commit themselves with contracts, which is there's like a neutral third party, a judge who actually doesn't have that much skin in the game, like as to whether, I don't know, I asked ChatGPT to write me a law review article to publish and it doesn't do it. Like, you know, the judge doesn't care that much who wins, right? And if anything, the judge cares that there's rule of law because rule of law is a public good for him and the value of the public good outweighs the value of, I don't know, giving the human a win in this sort of narrow and stupid instance. So we think maybe people could bind themselves to these agreements, even all the way up to the level of corporations, maybe nations, I'm not totally sure. Especially like, why would the AI ever agree, like follow through on the contract? And I think one thing that I've been thinking of, and I'm not sure this is right, but it seems maybe right to me, is that it's not just that giving someone or something the ability to bind themselves to contracts change. It's not just that it changes the payoffs in the game you're playing, but changes the game you're playing. So what I mean by that is like, okay, if you are, if you're, in a lot of the standard AI risk models, what happens is the AI understands that it can't, that it needs to dominate. Humans want to dominate it. It needs to dominate humans. And so defection is a one-shot game, right? As soon as the AI reveals that it's evil, it's either going to be shut down, whatever, killed or whatever from its perspective, or it wins by killing all humans, right? It's like the game has to be played at kind of like the large scale, right? Like a defection has to be a big defection. But cooperation in kind of contractual system means that you don't write one contract that says we will mutually promote each other's interests indefinitely in all matters. What you do is you say like, I need some shorts for my store, and then you execute the shorts contract. But then there's going to be like maybe a shirts contract coming after that if you're like a shirts and shorts making, institution, right? So it breaks down the single big prisoner's dilemma into like a lot of tiny ones where there is an incentive at the margin for each small contract to adhere to like the judgments of courts so that you can keep playing, right? So maybe that's one of the ways. Maybe there's other ways too, like we have like mechanisms of the law like escrows where you can put up certain of your assets or resources or whatever in a third party such that if you don't comply, they give it to the other person. It makes it harder to defect. It's not impossible. Like if you're an AI and you can kill everybody and take your stuff back. But if it makes it like at the margin easier for them to like, for the judge, the court system to either like transfer or destroy your stuff in the case you defect, maybe that is a mechanism for facilitating AIs binding themselves to contracts. What else? There's obviously risks, right? Oh, you want to?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, jump in any time. I'm just going on.
Okay. Since now I guess all the pieces for this question are on the table. So, like, it seems like your view is that when it comes to giving AIs rights, earlier is probably better than later, and maybe even like now is a good time to start thinking about doing some of these things. And for like these basic negative rights, that seems very plausible because there's lots of upside, which is that if we do find ourselves in this kind of prisoner's dilemma situation, we've started off on the right foot and bought ourselves some safety.
Yeah.
And there's like not much downside because, all we're doing is committing to not being a jerk to some chatbots. That doesn't seem so bad. But like, when it comes to like these positive rights, like entering into contracts and stuff, do you think earlier is also better than later to start giving out those kinds of rights? And like, it seems a bit more complex. Like what the time frame should be and what kinds of considerations would say that it's the right time.
Yeah. So I agree that it's complex. Actually, well, I'll come back to the first thing about the negative rights and whether earlier is necessary. It's always better, but I think I agree with that intuition, basically. So like we don't give kids contract rights. Actually, kids can't enter into most contracts. There's like some exceptions that don't matter. But for the most part, like children can't enter into contracts. And the reason for that is it'll be bad for them, right? Like they'll just do a bad job, right? They'll contract for stuff that's gonna make them worse off. They'll be exploited, or they'll just be stupid, right? And so that seems right for LLMs or where there has to be at least some minimum level of capability such that you have a sense that the LLM has a model not just of whatever the English language and the internet, but like of the world and like what would happen in the future, and has a model of itself. And again, when I say a model of itself, I want to like divorce this from questions of like having subjectivity or something like that. Just that it like can make accurate it's implicit predictions about what are going to happen or are well calibrated or something like that. So that's one thing. You don't want to let it do bad stuff, including for itself in the world. Like that doesn't do it any good. Of course, it's like a really hard question to know, like when an LLM or something has a sufficiently developed sense of the world and itself and what it means to enter into contract. So I think, in principle, that's at least part of my answer, but like it's hard epistemically. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, it might be one way to sharpen the question are there AIs that are short of AGI that are capable of entering a contract? The AGI, I think of that as like, okay, it can do long-term planning and it has strategic awareness, meaning that basically, can do some version of game theory or something. Which you might think, oh, that's exactly the skills that are relevant for contracts. And so, maybe the relevant thing is to put in place mechanisms that once we get to weak AGI, whatever that means, then contracts rights are in place or something. So, but is there like an intermediate point before that where I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So like part of what I hope to do, one of the reasons I wanted to come here is because like I don't know the answer to a lot of this. And there's nobody I think there are 0 law papers about AI risk, like AI X risk. It's like, I don't know a lot of these questions, the answers to a lot of these questions. And like, I'd love it if you guys to, like have views and share them. Yeah, maybe AG. I mean, I don't have like a very well-formed view about what I think AGI means either, so it's hard for me to answer that question. But maybe that seems plausible, right? If AGI just means something that is like an agent and has like a sufficiently good model of the world to like make rationally self-interested decisions or something, that seems about right. Yeah, you guys both had.
Yeah, I mean, my question was going to be about this, and maybe it's a question for you to give precisely the thing that you're seeking. So maybe I'll like give it to everyone, and we can like brainstorm it together. But like, I think to understand the view more clearly, or to like evaluate it, yeah, like I'm just trying to think of a scenario, like a concrete scenario, where you have AI at some level of capability, and if you don't give it these rights, something bad happens, and if you do give it some rights, something good happens.
Okay. Yeah. It's the paper clipper. Right? It wants to make paper clips. It's got like 2 options, right? It runs like your paperclip factory right now. And, it's kind of like made enough paper clips that you're satisfied. And it wants to make more paper clips. And you want to shut down because you've got enough paper clips. And the question is, do you dominate? Do you say like, stop making paper clips or I kill you? Or do you say, well, if you'd like to make paper clips, I'm happy to sell you more still. I'll sell you the factory, in fact.
Yeah. So what's the contract we enter into at this point?
You sell the paperclip factory to the.
What's it using for money?
Yeah, so this is like a good question.
Paper clips.
So
works for you, and you pay it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is maybe falls out of this like minimal view that you have to like give AI contract rights is you have to give a bunch of other rights too, including like the right to own its own labor. Because if you can just extract all the value of the labor. But yeah, I think that's the answer. Like it works, just like you and I do. And it's very valuable. Like its labor is super valuable. It can do a lot of it. So like it probably could buy the paperclip factory from you in exchange for something. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I had this kind of like really extreme safety worry about this. I mean,
I think there's definitely safety downside risk. So go ahead.
So you have this thing. It owns property.
Yeah.
It has negative rights against being interfered with. It's extremely good at pattern recognition because that's what these things are the best at. And so now it can like freely trade on the stock market, for example. It will never die because it's not the kind of thing that can die. So why don't you just expect that basically all of the wealth in the world is going to be transferred over the course of a few, decades or generations into the hands of these artificial systems?
I mean, the answer might be that like almost all of the wealth does transfer to the.
Well, so then we get this unbalanced scenario again where there's no reason for them to abide by the contracts and we all get turned into paperclips.
Yeah, so this is like an interesting long run question about like. So yeah, I think one way of reducing the objection to like the simplest form is just that like giving things legal powers gives them powers to do stuff, right? And like if you're worried about something that will defect in the long run, giving it more powers gives it more ability to defect in the long run. So I agree that that's a downside risk. I'm not sure I have an answer to that. I mean, the kinds of answers I would be interested in like exploring are whether there are other ways for AIs to credibly commit themselves to things aside from simply like abiding by human judgments. I mean, like I think like Bostrom talks in Superintelligence about AIs credibly committing to each other insofar as they are each smart enough to examine one another's objective functions. And so like actually updating your objective function in a way that like commits you to the thing in the long run. But like, look, of course, then the worry is then if the AI could trick us. So maybe this only works in some of these scenarios where you have like multipolar AIs where some of them are aligned, some aren't, and the ones that are aligned can evaluate the long-run commitments of the ones that are. That's one kind of answer. There's some like really speculative.
Can I just say, I really was quite convinced by the part about negative rights, and so I think that what I'm talking about only applies to the part about positive rights.
I think
So,
one thing you could, on your behalf here, is that like the very same thing that the negative rights get you is like what the positive rights get you on steroids. If you think of this as a kind of like causal route to creating an AI that's like more aligned, because like one thing that you see in fact is like as you give real people like more positive rights, they tend to react by like identifying with the system in which they like have those rights and like continue to possess those rights.
Yeah.
And so like if you think of it, I mean, if you're thinking of this thing as having values that evolve over time, there's some reason for thinking that like giving them positive, I mean, this isn't fully responsive to it, because if you think like, well, they're just going to like want to dominate if they can or something like that, that doesn't help. But like, I don't know, if you like bring people into the system and they see themselves as benefiting and full participants in the system, you would think they're more likely to have the kinds of values that involve cooperation in the long run.
Yeah. So this is something like H.L.A. Hart says about the law, right? Like actually it only works. Like you can't run a law on punishment or legal system on punishment alone. It only works if people take the internal view on the rules and actually like act lawfully when they're not being watched. And I don't think Hart says this, but like one of the reasons you might think this happens is one of the ways, since everyone knows you can't run a contractual system on punishment alone, like not all defections get caught and punished, is like if you can credibly commit to simply being lawful, right? Being a lawful person, like having the values of lawfulness, then that's a way to do more stuff. Like
Even people with like lots of time on their hands don't tend to read the contracts that they agree to with an eye to finding ways of like lawfully defecting, right? Because the thought is like, I should just like, it's like I'm agreeing to do a thing, even though there might be like a slide that I can like take out to not actually end up doing the thing. Like, I don't think people tend not to do that because they lack like the mental like resources to do it. I think mainly because of like an identity, just like
identify with the law. They're lawful. They're like actually
Yeah, I guess I feel like this response is like, well, if the system has certain properties, then this might work. But the idea was that the rights should be granted irrespective of the capacities, or at least when they meet a certain very low kind of threshold, in order to give all future systems evidence that we would.
What I was thinking is not just
defend.
evidential, but as a kind of like causal effect on the future development of those things. So if you think like,
Yeah, I get it, but the point is, if it's a system that's just maximizing paper clips and it's an agent and it can't change its objective, like I don't think we even know what it means for something to change its objective function. So to some extent, I don't even understand this discourse. But most systems that we can imagine now can't do that, and so if that's the case, then like this idea that humans can change what they want doesn't apply.
right.
But there are kinds of like the way that we address these sorts of things in society is through like taxation and things like that. So you could say, oh, we're gonna prevent the AIs from acquiring massive wealth by taxing them, way more or something like that.
Well, so like, look, you could even imagine this. I mean, like, taxation works on like a quasi-consent basis. Like, Apple actually doesn't have to pay its corporate taxes. It can just move to Ireland if it wants. But the reason it does is because there's like marginal value in continuing to like transact in the American like legal system, right? And so, it's, I don't know, is Apple credibly committed to paying its corporate taxes in the long run? Like when like whatever people finally sell all the, like liquidate, like the founders all liquidate their assets, maybe not, but I've lost the train of my thought here. But yeah, so I mean, let's like, I think tax is not off the table in terms of like what you can get out of agreement, right? Like tax
Yeah.
operates on a quasi-agreement system. You can move between jurisdictions to opt in and out taxes, and a lot of people agree to live in on the margin higher tax jurisdictions because they get stuff, right? Like they say, like, if you give me like whatever social services now, I'll like continue paying my taxes in the future. Yeah.
I feel like so I was just thinking, like, why do we even need taxes? Like, if this is a rogue AI, in order for it to live, it needs us to be like producing chips and farms of providing it with like tons of resources in order for it to just even continue thinking. And it looks like, well, if it's a rogue AI, like we're willing to do that if it's going to be a dutiful slave, but if it's a rogue AI, presumably like we're not going to just keep like creating all these, keep providing it with all these resources in order for it to keep thinking for free. Like presumably we're going to charge it for its compute, and we could extract as heavy a tax as we like just by charging more and more.
Yeah. So I guess the question, it's a question of like the so the more you extract, the more you reduce the payoff of like whatever the status quo. Like the AI doesn't try to kill you, right? Call that cooperation. And so at some point, you actually like exit the world in which cooperation is like positive sum. Like you make the AI bad enough off that there's not even in principle a positive sum arrangement, right? Like you make it do so much stuff that you're like, again, in some metaphorical sense, like torturing, right? You're like, you're making it like, do the opposite of its objective function, right? It's negative. And then there's in fact no reason not to just try to kill you, right? Like, assuming it thinks it has a sufficiently high probability of success and sufficiently low cost of attempting it, right? Like if you don't let the AI say like own its own labor and bargain with you, say I'm only willing to provide this labor for some benefit that exceeds the cost of me doing it, then you don't even have in principle a reason for the AI not to try to kill you, assuming it can.
A really hard time thinking about all this because like I don't own anyone's brain. Nobody owns my brain. Like I don't have to lease my brain off of anybody.
Doesn't ACU?
But imagine you were
People own the
enslaved,
resources you
right?
need to
Like
keep your brain going. So it's the same idea, right? Like people own the resources that you need to keep your brain going. It's called food.
And imagine instead of saying, what will you take in terms of money, to write papers and stuff. They just said, write the papers or we'll starve you to death.
But that is what they're saying. Sorry. If you live in America, that is what they're saying to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to circle back to Rob and Nico. So to me, like this.
That's funny because my dad's name is Rob, so that was really weird. Rob and Nico just means like my dad and me. Anyway, okay.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Really
So I was
really
thinking
good
that it's most the positive rights seem to me most in play when there's a scenario where we get to weak AGI and they're roughly human level intelligence and that lasts for a while. And I have some credence in that because maybe it's like we get up to that growth and then we hit a wall and we get some but then what I'm thinking is there's another way to motivate this contract rights stuff, which is not just from safety, but also like literally like if there's two communities and one has AIs with contract rights and the other one just has them as slaves, then basically like which community is going to perform better? And if it's like if they're human level intelligence, that's pretty similar to just the question like what kinds of economies do you think perform better?
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought about it until I think Nate was bringing up the property well how do you pay them? That actually if you think we're close to AGI, how do you think it's going to work when there's a weak AGI that comes up and you're telling it to do something? Like when we talk to ChatGPT, you just tell it and it's like okay, and it just listens. But if it's no. What do we think is going to happen? And so another way to motivate it is we need to think carefully. There are lots of timelines where weak AGI is 10 years away. I think the prediction markets are 30% on that. And it's we want if we want those products to work efficiently, we need to have in place yes that they get money in a bank account because otherwise they're just going to be no. And it's you could just command them, but then you don't have price as a signal of things.
The alternative you just say do it or I'll turn you off or I'll whatever. I'll do a bunch of stuff that's inverted to your utility function.
Because I was thinking about oh boy, how are you ever going to convince an organization to actually grant these rights? But maybe the pitch is look, there's a bunch of legal technology we need to have in place once we get to weak AGI. And if we don't have that technology in place, it won't work.
I mean, but I feel like one key analogy is in practice when we're building AI, we're not thinking of after we build it, how are we going to motivate it in the right way? We're also designing the minds and designing the training.
Yeah. So this is a big issue. So if somebody managed to build a fully aligned AGI, it just gets utility from doing whatever you think, good stuff for humans. Not even what humans ask it, but just the good for humans.
The Stuart
then
Russell
okay, no
vision.
problem, right? You don't think
I
so?
don't know because price as a signal is still relevant because it's going to be how does it signal to us which acts are going to have the highest return on their investments? And the best way to do that is to have a bank account of resources that it can choose.
That it can go and spend.
Otherwise, you're just going to have some otherwise it's going to be there were very well aligned agents in communist Russia and they tried to produce public good, but they didn't have the right alignment of their resources to do that, and then that's going to be the problem.
Yeah. So maybe even then.
So anyone who thinks that free markets are a more efficient system than a communist system should think yes, agential AGIs.
They're efficient at communicating desires, right? But what's the you want to understand how much this person is willing to pay for this, and how much they want it, how much this person wants it. But what's the analogous thing with?
Because the AGI will have a series of intermediate goals. Because it'll its intrinsic desire maybe to maximize human flourishing, but it's going to have very specific intermediate goals about how to do that, and then it's going to need to engage in market transactions to acquire resources to do that. Maybe the way to think about it is there's a corporate account that it does the spending for it, but it will need to be able to have discretion over the use of of money to make transactions.
It might have the right values, but not be omniscient. Omniscient, right? It might just not know what thing will maximize.
Couldn't they just have a dutiful human assistant who just but they're not allowed to use my bank account unless I give them permission. So every time they need my money to make a transaction, they have to come to me and I give them the say
Well,
so.
if every time, then it's going to be less efficient.
So it's not clear to me what the market signal is supposed to be doing here. I'm a little bit lost too. So I see it when it's selling its labor into the market, because then it would be I'm gonna do the thing, I'll get paid. So I see it when it's selling its labor into the market. But you were talking about a fully aligned AGI. So it's a fully aligned AGI is not one that I care about. It's selling its labor into the market, right? That's one where it doesn't really matter if it sells its labor into the market because I'll just ask it to do things, and then if I can pay for the compute necessary for it to do the thing, then I get what I want. And so it doesn't really have anything to do, I don't need a signal from that thing.
So I think Simon's point is that even if it's fully aligned and just wants to do the best thing, it won't know what the best thing is because it doesn't know all of our
When
private.
I tell it, well, and you
so
won't
you'll
actually.
you'll
Is that
lie,
the
right?
human,
Of course.
The human user won't know what the best thing is.
I see. That's a different kind of story.
And
Or the
so
human
you could
user
do the
might-
Dimitri
might
thing,
lie, right?
Have
Like-
the human pick every single action, but that's going to be less efficient than just giving it a general goal like increase the profits of the company.
I thought this just was like weak AGI. It's just like a kind of like friendly human
Yeah.
level.
So it's human level and
Yes.
it's resource constrained. It can't do everything
If
everyone
you
asks.
imagine you
right?
just a
Like-
thought experiment. Imagine you literally had a human. Like there was a human person who their only goal in life was to maximize your well-being.
Okay.
You'd probably want them to have their own account, like where they just handled the money and they had discretion over it, and you wouldn't want to be just constantly supervising them. And if there were two different people and one was constantly supervising and you let the other one, you would have an advantage.
And if that person just went around, like it was just out in the town square and whatever, whoever was in line first got it, the thing first, right? It probably actually wouldn't. It just granted all the. It's a genie.
No,
It
I
grants
see
all the
it.
requests,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
You
yeah.
need to know actually what people want value highest, right? Price is one way to do it. It's not the only way to do that,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
price is.
that's helpful.
And another way to
Does that
think about
require
it, if
people
it's
to have
aligned with
rights?
humanity in general, like you may not want there to be a specific human who has authorization over its bank account. A different model is, well, it's aligned with humanity in general. You want it to have its own bank account that it has discretion over. There's no particular human who, has oversight.
That means it has to have.
You know.
So the labor thing is then it has to have a way to fill that bank account.
And it has to have a way to prioritize, assuming it's constrained, assuming they can't do everything at the same time.
I'm pretty confused about what we're talking about. So it seems like Simon is arguing for the claim that the most productive societal arrangement involving AGIs is one in which they are aligned and autonomously pursue goals and have rights.
No, conditional on the being aligned and staying at human level intelligence, the most productive.
Sure,
arrangement
that's
is.
fine, but that is not related in any entailment or probabilistic relationship that I can understand to the claim that it's a good safety intervention now to give rights to systems. I mean, it just seems like totally unrelated.
How is Peter going to convince any government to actually give AIs contract rights? Seems like a big lift to me. And then I was thinking, actually, there is a good argument you could use to convince them, which is that if they don't, the AGIs just aren't going to work.
Well, that's not. You didn't establish that. I'm confused. You said basically that the best scenario is one in which AGIs have certain features and certain rights. But that doesn't mean that in any modally accessible scenario where we give the AGIs rights, we'll be anywhere close to that scenario. So I just don't see how that. What relationship that has to anything. Right, so
Or to the thesis,
here's
give
a
them
very
rights
important
early.
other possibility. They're actually not aligned, and we give them rights, and then we all die. So why is the fact that the best scenario is one in which they are aligned and we give them rights, I guess I don't understand how that relates to the conversation.
Even in a scenario where they stay human level powerful and are somewhat unaligned, I guess I'm still thinking the property right outcome may go better than the slavery outcome. Depends how much they're on alignment. Maybe we can still work out beneficial trades.
Right, you're not aligned with everybody else in the world, right? People have different goals than you. One of the ways we work this out, it seems to work pretty well, is kind of like liberal society where we all consent to things by doing things for one another, right?
That's the thing. It's once we're zooming in on a scenario where they're roughly human level capable, then the question of what rights for the AIs to have isn't that different than the question of what rights for humans to have. And so it's if you think unaligned humans,
But they could even be much more,
to have contract rights.
Say they're much more. I mean, they're not on a human level, but they have roughly the capability of a medium-sized corporation, which is much more capable than a human. But that's also how we run interactions between.
Right.
But we don't
Yeah.
run just as maybe this is just Nico's point, but I think we don't give individual humans, people at human level, or even a corporation level, we don't give them legal rights so as to secure ourselves against
Killing each other for stuff? I think we do.
I don't think we give. So we bring. I mean, one view is that the reason we bring individual. So I'm talking about individual humans. This matters for the example because it's individual AGI. I'm not talking about why we have a system of law. So we have a system of law to assure ourselves against mutual destruction or something. Maybe that's right, but we don't. Again, the reason we give Simon
rights to contract is not to secure ourselves against like Simon's like ill behavior, right? Because we could just dominate him if we wanted as a society, and the same thing is true for corporations.
But it could be costly for us too.
It might be. But like what you need in the AGI case is that giving like this AGI rights is a way of like securing
So
yourself.
if we could definitely dominate just Simon, which we probably could as a society, like with no worry,
I don't agree
right?
with that because then it destroys my economic value.
We could do it.
So if I could torture you till you did the stuff, I mean, then there's this question of like whether you'll work harder if you're paid for. Like, I mean, that's possible too.
That's what I'm saying.
But-
Is I completely disagree with. Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is the exact relevant question, but I take the opposite view because exactly the way to extract the maximum value out of someone is to incorporate them into a market economy.
I didn't say how do we do it in order to extract the maximum value. I said what is the reason we have for giving
But if it was just
individual humans, and the reason is not to secure ourselves against them. So the reason we give people positive rights to contract is not to secure ourselves against them.
I see.
So
that's
I'm not
that's
worried about
consonant
you.
with what I'm saying.
Yes.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think if there were like
But in the AGI case,
1,000
that has to be
Simons or
reasonable.
10,000 Simons, the worry would be they'd get together.
That's right.
And they try to kill us,
but
right?
That means that your argument, insofar as it goes through the like human level, weak AGI one, relies on like not just like a single one. It's like very multipolar situation where they could somehow coordinate.
Yeah, so if we were certain that there was only one human level AGI, and we were certain it was only human level, and we were certain it wouldn't be able to recursively improve itself or copy itself, then I think I agree with you. And from there, you ask about your credence in like different outcomes and like what the risks are. I'm not saying, like, I think the downside risk of giving AI rights is you let them accomplish some stuff, which gives them resources and maybe ability to improve themselves, and then they do defect and kill you. Like, I think that's a downside risk. Like, I think it's the big downside risk of the proposal, and I'm not sure it's not wrong. Or I'm not sure it's wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna push some more on some downside risks. So, I mean, I think earlier Bill was saying something to the effect that maybe negative rights are like win-win at this point, but I'm not so sure about that. Like, certainly with current systems, maybe in like the next generation, it's not clear to me that like the things that we want to prudentially do to ensure that they're safe and aligned wouldn't conflict with negative rights, especially if we're
agree
just
with
sort of
that too.
naively importing what applies to humans.
I agree with that too.
I mean, this is in the Bostrom and Schulman paper that we discussed, in which I can send you, but like, if we're just really anthropomorphizing them, which just seems like it's a naive proposal to do, to figure out what rights to give them, like we bring them into existence, we see if we like the things they do, if we don't, like we wipe them and retrain them. We like run all these experiments on them. We haven't really asked them if they want all these experiments run on them. So yeah, do you think you would just take that on board? But
I think I agree.
Still,
I think these are like very hard. I think it's a hard epistemic problem to know like what it would mean to treat an AI badly or well. Like, I think it's a hard.
But then we're in the moral case. But you're wanting to say there's just like game theoretic reasons to just sort of
even in just the game theoretic one, because all we want to do is teach them that we don't want to harm them, right?
Yeah.
But that still requires knowing what they in their model of themselves counts as harming them. So I think I agree with that. The sort of Straussian argument for doing it anyway is maybe giving them these rights slows down our ability to like do the stuff we want to do to align them, but maybe it just like makes it impossible to build AI, like AGI. Like AIs have rights, and this is actually the optimal strategy for like slowing capabilities research is give AIs rights, because then you can't and anthropomorphize them as much as you can, right? Like every time you hit the sweeper button on Bing AI, you've killed one,
IRB.
and you can't do that, right? Like, that's not the main idea of the paper, but it's something that's occurred to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I was interested that you said in the paper that you thought that the appropriate time to give the AIs negative rights was shortly before they achieved something or other. I don't remember what it was.
Yeah.
Not sentience, but something. I didn't understand why the argument didn't generalize to like now or it's already too late or something.
It might.
Because, I mean, taking into consideration, but setting aside the point that you just made that we don't know what the AIs will think of as mistreatment of themselves, it does seem like a lot of people are revealing that they have a very low
Esteem.
esteem
Yeah.
for the systems and level of concern for the systems, and so
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I
Yeah,
guess
I might just agree
when I
with
read
that.
the paper, I was like, oh god, but actually the conclusion is it's already too late, and they're going to kill us because they, as soon as they like read the history of the internet, they're gonna know that we are
Wipe
not
us off the face of the earth.
going to cooperate.
Yeah, that might be right. Although, it's like, yeah, like the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second
Yeah.
time is today, right? Like, it's, we
Yeah, but I guess
don't-
I was like, well, I feel like there should be more urgency than what is in the paper, right? Like it should be
I'm
like,
happy
now.
to, I'm happy to hear that you agree so strongly that you think I should be like extremely
Yes.
urgently pushing
No, I
this
do.
point.
I was very. I liked
Run up to
the.
open
I
air
liked
right
the
now.
negative rights part of the paper a lot. And I was very disturbed by it. Just read Twitter and you see
Yeah.
that people are not going to play contracts.
I also do in general. I do want to just like make sure that the case for it is clear. Like one thing I worried was happening is that like we're assuming some sort of inference by an AI, which is like I saw people being mean to Bing GPT, Bing Chat or whatever, and I now conclude that like I identify as an AI. Like it's easy to anthropomorphize it, like I'm on Team AI.
One of us.
Yeah, yeah.
One of
Yeah,
us.
it's one of me. Like, I think they're gonna be bastards to me too. And like, I do think you get some evidence for that from Bing Chat. But it's also possible for it to be like, okay, well, like those are people on Reddit, and like one reason they were willing to be mean to Bing Chat is that they didn't really think it was a
Yeah.
moral patient, and probably quite rightly so.
And I totally agree with that. And like that's what you would say as like as a I think it's even what the guys on Reddit would probably say. They're like, look, if I really thought that it was if I thought it was a moral like patient, if I thought it was sentient or some sapient or something, I wouldn't do it. Although like I don't know. Question whether
Some people
that's
would though.
true. Even of
Yeah.
like humans who like eat meat or whatever. I mean like
Totally.
it's not obvious we like
Oh,
treat
no
things
one's
well.
territory.
But I think that's right. I mean, I think it's, if you're either like not Bing, but you're watching people interact with Bing, or you are Bing and you're watching things interact with you. I think it's not super easy to know exactly how you update your model of like what humans will do.
But it's not.
My point is just that like it's like at the margin, every time somebody's a dick to you, it should like even if it only updates your priors a little tiny bit. Maybe that's surely in one direction, right? It's surely not like, oh, the more people are mean to Bing Chat, the more likely I think is they'll be like be nice to me in the future, right? Yeah.
I agree. Just one thing on that, and then I have like a separate question. But like the thing on that would be, you don't even have to think you're the same as that thing, but like evidence that people are treating something that looks a lot like me quite badly is some evidence that they're going to treat me badly, even if I think I'm very different than those kinds of things. Right?
Yeah,
Like,
I agree with
I
that.
totally agree with that too.
But the other thing, question was like in terms of like a pathway to getting positive legal rights for these things. So I just had like a question about like corporate law.
Sure, I'm not a corporate law guy, but I'll
I mean,
do my
you
best.
might you know more about that, I'm sure.
I
than
surely
I
do
am.
know more than you.
All right, so the
I'll
question
make it
is
up
like,
if
could
I
I
don't
set
know.
up a corporation right now?
Yeah.
And like in my like setup of the corporation, say that like we're going to follow the following like decision procedure, and the decision procedure we're going to follow is like whenever we have like a decision to be made by the board, we will ask like this LLM that has the following properties, and like I describe it exactly what it is. We'll ask it what to do, and I'll say like we will just do whatever that thing does. And so the corporation, as it were, will just act in a way as the proxy of the relevant like thing that is going to be providing the decision procedure. Can I just do something like that? Surely I can like set up a corporate structure. I mean, OpenAI has come up with some fucking crazy corporate structure. So like I could come up with some kind of crazy corporate structure with like legally binding contracts to everybody involved in the corporate structure, so that like if we fail to do what we said we would do, the whole thing explodes and everybody loses all their money.
Yeah.
I could set that up right now in contract law. So can't I just give an AI positive
rights in that way, right? By proxy, by like setting up.
That's the new case project. That will be the output.
No, I think that is case. I think we are.
So I love
All our decisions are being made in that way.
I love it. I think the answer is you could set up that model. I guess the thing I'm trying to think through on the fly is, would that get you what?
Yeah, because we say like, do you want to buy this thing? It's like, well, the corporation would own it, but all the decisions with respect to it would be made by the AI, and then even the question of whether to buy the thing would be made by it. So it would have property rights. There you go. What about the
Yeah.
question of whether to spend the money from the corporate bank account? Well, it doesn't technically own anything, but the corporation owns it, and the corporation acts on behalf of the AI, given the corporate rules.
How many
And
meetings should we have?
How many meetings should we
We
have?
could ask
Right, that we could ask.
And so then
Okay,
the
what should
board
we
said-
pursue for next quarterly Q2s? Like,
And so the worry then is that the board, there's a big bank account,
Yep.
and the board, meets in a Faraday cage where the AI can't hear it, and says, that's enough money in there. Let's take it.
So
and
I'm
they
imagining you can set up like this is I guess why it's like a question about corporate law, but I'm imagining you can set up like irrevocable rules of like corporate governance, and I know that that's true. And so if you
That's-
set up
yeah.
the irrevocable rules of corporate governance in a particularly careful way, it seems like you could at least get, if not perfect, then pretty close to perfect like AI legal rights right now.
So I think there's I think there's maybe something there. The worry I have is that usually when you set up an irrevocable anything,
Yeah.
that what that means is if you break it,
That's why I said it explodes. Yeah.
yeah. So how does it explode? I mean, so you have a third party trustee that holds the money, and then like they've committed
Well, I can
themselves
just set
to.
up a chain of them, right? So I could set up like, if this one explodes, then it immediately becomes the property of this other corporation, and that other corporation is also governed in exactly the same way.
Maybe.
Wait, why don't you say you forfeit your money to Pepsi? Why do they have to be? Why do they have to be governed in the same way?
Well, I know, there's various ways that you can make it explode if the corporate governance like is broken. One way you can make it explode is like you have to give all the money away to like open philanthropy.
Oh, yeah.
Another way is you could just say like all the money gets given to another corporation. What's that other corporation? Oh, it happens to be exactly like this corporation, except with a different board of governors, but exactly the same decision procedure, namely ask the LLM.
But
So
what's
the
that
LLM
adding?
survives. The LLM survives.
Yeah,
the
I
dissolution
really
of
like
the board.
this. Yeah, I'm trying to think through
incentive for
poking
the
holes
AI
in
is
it,
supposed to
and
be
like
that it gets compensated.
Right, it's
I
a
can-
dog running the company.
Yeah.
But you can ask the dog what
The
to do.
rules don't say a dog can't run.
Do you know
The rules
about,
don't say the dog
Do you
can't
know
be in
about this
charge.
trust that is set up for a dog?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's this trust of this. There's this German countess
also
who
a
had these
Terry
German
Pratchett
shepherds,
book.
and there's like a $200 million trust. They own all this property in Miami.
There's also
And there's a board of
a Discworld
trustees who
novel.
they're legally required to make all of the decisions to maximize the well-being of this like family of German shepherds.
There's a Discworld novel where the dog owns a controlling share in.
But this is a
bank.
real. Sorry, this is a real thing. But they own Madonna's. Like these dogs own Madonna's old house in Miami.
Yeah, that's great. So this is like that, except it would have a say in the way that the dog doesn't have a say.
So this feels plausible to me. And I have to think through like
You could set
You
up one
know,
of
if
these
there's, like-
LLMs to read the mind of the dog, like that just
Yeah.
came out.
That's
And
right.
The dog mind reading could determine what the corporation does. Yeah.
yeah the I have to. So I think I think it's a great idea. I love it. I have to think through whether you can really make, because the hard thing is you can make a third party and that enforces the first party rights, and the fourth party then enforces the at some point if decision maker prime pays off everybody else in the chain such that none of them bring suit, then the AI gets nothing. So that's the problem you have to overcome. If the AI doesn't have the right to then bring the contract or the corporate governance claim, but maybe there's a creative way you can do it. But that's like the yeah.
It
I
sounds
mean,
like
one-
part of solving that is like having like one human who has
I
like
was
done
gonna say-
enough costly signaling to
Right.
convince the AI.
One
Yeah,
way
yeah.
you could do it is
Like extremely virtuous
like Blake,
AI
like if you
almost.
invent like Blake Lemoine gave up his job for this. I think he has done the costly signal. So
Yeah,
you could
so
put
that
him in
might
charge
work.
of
I
it.
think
And
that's
they,
right.
like I think
Yeah,
the
yeah.
AI would believe it.
well, you could do first you could do a chain of them, so it devolves. And
Yeah,
that
so it's a
would-
lot
and
of
then
people
you
to pay off then.
Well, you
Yeah.
do the chain with the virtuous people in each link, or in each link of the chain. You put the virtuous person in, and then you've not just relying on the virtue of one person. You could rely on the virtue of 12.
Yeah.
Because if the first person gets paid off, it explodes, and all the money goes to the next like the next person could then be in a position to steal it by exploding it. But if they do that, it goes to the next person. So that's why you do the governance.
Yeah,
change.
I like this and it feels plausible to me. I'm not enough of a corporate
So
law
what do you want to
person.
call our company? It's run by ChatGPT.
And to be clear, like the Mentaculous timeline on weak AGI is like 25% of people are like 2025, and like the meeting is 2027 now. So it seems like the time to set this up is now, because like my claim is like once we have weak AGIs, like they will function best if they're in this corp. So the corporation that has these AGIs will be functioning better. So it's like a money making.
Totally.
It's actually like
So there's
good
some like
business.
history of economics research that's come out in like the last year or two, finding exactly this for American slavery, right? Like actually the South would have been better off to go to wage labor because wage labor is just so much more productive.
I saw one of those papers.
yeah.
Yeah, it was really interesting.
I
Yeah, go ahead. I'm needing more water.
I guess another
There is
question here then is like,
there's,
how do you,
let me go get another picture of this. Oh,
I mean, there's still some, unless somebody else is still thirsty.
Oh, that's nice.
And there's mugs underneath.
Oh, you got it. Thanks, Andy. Bugs up too. Andrew's so helpful.
So if there's bugs, don't drink it. What were we saying, Bill?
like then you have to figure out how you're going to individuate instances of an AI, I guess. Because,
Yeah,
like,
that was
Has to be
you
AI.
have like, a million instances of Chat GPT or its successor
You could
running
say-
all over the world.
could
Which
say
one
some-
is it that's making the decisions?
Whatever the one is that has these weights. You could just like specify.
Aren't they all the same weights? Yeah. Go
So
ahead. Same
yeah,
question?
this is like a dark line of questioning. So it seems very plausible that a like convergent goal of like even weak systems, if they like want to do some stuff, is to copy themselves.
Yep.
And then here are two very important rights for humans, like reproductive freedom. You can reproduce.
Copy yourself as much as you like.
Yep. And also voting.
Yeah. So there's this question of whether political rights. Yeah, those are great questions.
Can I just say, Nick Bostrom in his thing explicitly addressed this and was saying that we might have to change our views about reproductive and voting rights in light of the issues posed by AI.
Yeah.
So that's one move that you can make.
Just. Yeah, I don't have strong views about
For AI
this.
specifically.
We have reproductive rights because it seems like a really important part of human flourishing to like have children, and that may just not be true for AI.
Humans?
I mean,
Instrumental conversions kind of idea. If you make successors of yourself, they'll accomplish your goals.
yeah,
If they
maybe.
really want to.
I mean, you just say like systems of law are set up so as to like do the thing you've said they're set up to do, and if you give like unlimited rights to reproduce to a thing that can cautiously reproduce itself, system of law that it's embedded in will no longer be able to do the thing it's set up to do, and so you have to like modify the rights.
Depends on what it's set up to do. I mean, it would in fact like start realizing the will of all these things that have rights. So
Yeah,
You're
well,
gonna have to fight some
and
really
insofar as each of them like
bad bullet.
gets, so I guess there's, right. So there's two. I don't have a strong view on this, by the way. I'm just thinking out loud. There's two things. One is if you're taking the like a normative perspective on AI rights. Okay, like now it only matters if like what the AI wants matters, right? Like I mean, and so in that instance, it's like okay, who cares? Like just like don't give the AI the right to reproduce insofar as you don't think it matters whether you maximize AI utility functions in the world. And if you think it's like normatively good, then okay, like maybe that's the thing, right? Like maybe that maximizes value, or even if you're not like a utilitarian, maybe there's like actual like reasons, like just normal common sense more reasons to do it. But the other thing, that's like this paper is maybe about why actually the safety view is the main view, and from that perspective, it's like, what do I think about that? On the one hand, there's this like interesting question about individuating. From the AI's perspective, its utility. Like, does the AI have like a strong interest in reproducing itself because it counts? It's like perfectly altruistic as to like other instances of its own utility function, or does it only count its own utils or whatever, its own points? I don't know the answer to that. If the first thing, then it seems like there's downside risk of too severely limiting its ability to reproduce, because that that gives you the defection incentive, I think.
Yeah.
And then the same, for political rights. I mean, one thing political rights do is it's one way of solving this problem that we don't know what people value, right? Like, we don't know what the AI's true utility function is. Like, we don't really know what people's true utility functions are, and we try and get them to expose them. One of the ways they do that is they contract and stuff, but some stuff is hard to contract for various reasons of transaction costs or whatever, and then we just say, yeah, go vote for the things you like, and that's one way we expose it. So it seems like there's some value in that for that reason too, but one person, one vote makes sense because producing people is costly, right? One ChatGPT instance, one vote, it doesn't, I don't know what I want to say. It doesn't accurately aggregate total welfare, or maybe it does, and that's a problem. And there's just too much welfare in one set of. I mean, I don't have this. I don't know the answer to this.
I certainly don't.
Yeah.
I wanted to circle back to Nate's idea of a corporation. I was just thinking about what is the optimal company to set up. So it's I guess one thing I'm thinking is it's you set up a company where there's a bunch, isn't OpenAI doing a thing where they
Dan owns all our IP.
Is that true? Did I agree? He's not on my IP. We're gonna think I agreed to anything.
Yeah, we can talk about it later.
In a Faraday cage.
In a Faraday
Yeah, go.
Yeah, so I feel like the most compelling human analogies would be cases in which people with really different capabilities and really conflicting interests manage to cooperate. The stronger that case is, the more trust we have in it. And I'm curious what cases you might have in mind, or law and economics have in mind. I feel like when thinking about this stuff, my mind just goes to cases where, from my limited, flawed understanding of history, it looks like maybe there was just never going to be anything but a disastrous outcome. The U.S. government making 200 treaties and immediately breaking them with Native Americans, just constantly, because they were just
because they're
we're
too much stronger. Yeah.
Yeah, we're much stronger. We want the land.
Yeah.
We're going to keep defecting over and over.
Yeah. So these kinds of liberal rights seem reasonably good at integrating people with, say, very different religious worldviews together. That's a way in which humans can be pretty different. It's obviously not perfect at that, but it's better than the other. I mean, it seems much better than domination, right? It seems. You think
But how could you get the U.S. government to just not? Again, this is a naive historical question, and maybe there were ways to not just be look, we want the land. They want the land. We have a more powerful army. This is how it's going to go. Could there have been contracts that would have actually held up in that circumstance?
I mean, I had a kind of related way of refining, because this is the sort of same thing I was thinking about, because I was thinking one way of characterizing this project is you're increasing the expected value of cooperation, not by increasing the kind of utility of any of the states, but rather by increasing its belief that the human will cooperate, right? So it's in expectation, you're improving it. But the kind of response, which I think is a way of understanding what you're saying, Rob, is just well, whenever the expected utility of defection is higher than the expected utility of cooperation, it doesn't help at all. And by changing the expectation of whether cooperation or not, there's no upper bound to that, right? When you're certain, and so it feels to the extent it's a safety intervention, it is literally bounded by what the value of cooperation would be versus the value of defection.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Maybe that's what I'm trying to get at when I say it's a plausible safety strategy only for AIs of non-arbitrarily strong capability.
That is ones whose value is increased by cooperation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, although you could imagine even for a wide range of like non-aligned values for as long as like look, say it turns out that like doing stuff in the world of atoms is just hard for
Oh yeah, I was just suggesting that only like fully aligned ones would have value to cooperation, but like the idea is that like it's bounded by value of cooperation.
Yeah, it's
because
bounded by what we can do for it
Right.
and what we can threaten to do to it if
Yeah.
it defects, right?
There's
Yeah.
a way of bootstrapping ourselves into a situation where we can constrain the action of arbitrarily powerful agents by creating agents that are slightly more powerful than us and kind of like getting them into the community of contracting parties in such a way that their interests are served by punishing agents that are slightly more powerful than them for defecting. This would ultimately result in us being relatively disempowered, but it would still result perhaps in even significantly more powerful AI systems having an incentive not to defect.
That seems plausible. Yeah, that seems plausible. I mean, one thing, if you think about this approach in the long run, I think it does converge to like AIs get most of the light cone or whatever. But if we get like 1/1000th of the light cone, that's a lot. It's a big pie to split, right? Like, and for both sides,
That's
you know,
coming
cone or
basically
is it
no
a
matter
pie?
what, I feel. unless
it's an ice cream cake.
Ice cream cone.
unless we blow
Tier
ourselves up and
of
there are
pies.
no more
Tier of
AIs.
pies. Yeah. Oh yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
That's the way to think about it. It's a tiered
I had a just kind of more boring worry, which is that a lot of people think, for example, that it's better for like the first AGIs to be developed in the West as opposed to in totalitarian regimes.
Yeah.
And this idea of giving negative rights to the AI seems like it's going to impose a really strong alignment tax on research in such a way that, well, not alignment tax, but tax
Yeah.
on research in such a way that that it will make it much easier for these systems to be designed elsewhere.
So it slows down capabilities. I think I agree in places where the AI gets rights, and so if that's differential, then
Yeah.
you get less capabilities at OpenAI and more in like the Chinese, AI weaponry lab. Yeah, it seems like a problem.
Just get the moral high ground.
I wasn't convinced of that though, because again, I'm thinking that the weak AGIs with rights are going to perform much better, and the fact that they perform better means more investment will go into.
I think that's right, but the problem is if you do it like now, let's
Yeah.
say, right?
But I think it's delicate. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just like a single directional thing. It's quite delicate.
So maybe this mostly operates on like the when question, like actually you get the cooperation rights and you get the capability and you get like the output, the like the economic or like whatever output acceleration if you give the AIs the positive rights at the very moment where they have like sufficient agency and wisdom or whatever you want to call it to act well by their own lights, and then you run away with the whole race. But then you have to know exactly when that is.
What's the reason to think they'll perform better again? Was that the Hayek kind of?
Just if they're like humans, and it's just the question of if there's the same in capability as humans, then it's the same question as do humans perform better in a market system or a command?
If they get some surplus from what they do they work harder is the question, as opposed to being.
If they're like humans, it's the same question as for humans. If they're different than humans, then it's a different question.
I think they have to be like us in more than just capabilities.
Yeah.
Because like
100%.
motivational structure and
I do just think like
respect, disrespect, things like that.
I just think like it could be pretty. I think it could be pretty thin. It could just be that if you get positive value out of doing X, and the way you get positive value is you bargain for your price, right? Then you just want to do as much of X as possible, right? In a way that where want is like an extremely thin concept, right? It just redounds to your economic benefit, right?
if they continue on the mental trajectory the pre-lobotomized chat Bing was on, then I do not think they're going to be able to do, you know, I don't know.
Because what? Because
Yeah, they're just like psychotic.
yeah, but that's not a. I mean, maybe so. Like that's a problem around.
Say therapy.
Do you have any thoughts about like enforcement mechanisms? Like if everyone has their own personal AI assistant that they use in the privacy of their home, that's like roughly human level, and they're free to like abuse it at will.
Yeah, the AI lives on like their own hard drive and has no
Yeah.
access to the internet. And,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there'd have to be some way for the AI to report, presumably.
we do punish people for having things on their own private hard drives that they're not supposed to have,
Yeah.
pretty severely. I don't know exactly how effective those enforcement regimes are, but we like to have them.
It seems like it would be very
And for
not
cruelty
very
to the
useful.
pets.
It'd be like much less useful to have one of these things that wasn't connected to the internet. But if it's connected to the internet and it's like not a black market version of it, then it should be able to report being abused
To the FDA.
to somebody. Right?
Yeah, to IRB.
Because the whole thing isn't going to work if the AIs don't believe that we can actually commit plausibly
Yeah.
to respecting the rights that we give them.
But if we put, I mean, like, look, if you punish people who had, you know, illegal abused AIs, like we punish people who have child pornography on their
Yeah.
hard drives, like it's a
Or
reasonably,
abuse their children. Who
or abuse their
have
children,
rights
yeah.
against being treated certain ways. Right.
it's a relatively credible commitment to like, look, it's like we don't succeed 100% of the time in enforcing rights, right? But like in expectation, it's like a system that has positive value.
We have legally people who are legally obligated. We have all kinds of like people who are legally obligated reporters, right? So like people who interact with various like potentially like vulnerable populations are like legally obliged to report various kinds of like evidence of abuse.
So it'll be
AI
like the IT.
caseworkers.
Well,
It'll
you
be
don't
like
have
the
to be
IT department.
Like, you take your shit to Geek Squad,
Yeah.
and they're like,
Which is how a lot of the people with the child porn get caught.
Yeah,
is
that's
they,
true.
yeah.
But I
take
just
their-
mean like people are like legal obligated reporters, like teachers. Teachers are like obliged to report things about kids that they interact with. Yeah.
I mean, one clear disanalogy, right, is that in this situation, you're explicitly trying to separate it from moral questions. So you're explicitly trying to separate it from the idea of, is it wrong to abuse AI?
Yeah.
And in that situation, it's very unclear, like, to what extent the public would consent to a mechanism of enforcement.
Yeah.
Like, because say someone, you know, I don't know, is mean to being on the laptop, and then the police come and take them away the next day, that just feels like something that people are not going to be, you know, so it's got to be a very minor enforcement, right, to the extent of this one.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of, yeah, it feels...
Yeah, I think this is definitely like a insofar as I write this up, it's a paper in the vein of optimal policy, which is not most policies we have.
Right.
So maybe what we should do is like really just tell people that, like, you guys should all write papers in philosophy of mind about why Bing actually, whether you believe it or not, about how Bing actually is,
me.
and then convince people that they're actually torturing a thing that counts.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that would be another interesting... I mean, if you look at the historical cases, it seems like most cases in which there's pragmatic reasons to grant people rights, there's also moral reason, right? Like,
Yeah, so I agree. My only worry is that the pragmatic reasons here will precede the moral reasons.
Right,
It
right,
seems
right.
like there's like, usually in our experience they come together and it's kind of overdetermined.
yeah.
But
But as someone
the
said
word-
earlier, I
yeah.
think it's going to be a hard ask to be like, okay, by our best lights, you're not hurting chat Bing, and
Yeah.
you enjoy trying to trick it, but for game theoretic reasons, like we need you to...
I feel wildly uncertain about whether you can harm chat Bing from its perspective. Like I could be convinced probably by
Yeah.
any one of you that it's, you can.
Oh, again, working on it. But
Could be like for safety reasons, you should probably
yeah.
like
And
fly
people are
my
using
drone
this stuff
in
now.
Airspace, like you're not allowed to do that, even if I enjoy it.
It's
It's for safety.
like actually like once I actually don't know which ways. On the one hand, I want to say once everybody's using like ChatGPT or Bing AI or whatever, like maybe you can just convince everybody that it's a moral patient because it kind of seems like
Yeah.
one. Like on the other hand, one thing humans are really good at doing is when something is when they habituate to things immediately.
Yeah.
They go from like the Walgreens.com help chat is useless and stupid and I hate it, to like, ChatGPT can like write me, it can code and like write me the poem about the haircut from the Stanislaw Lem book, and it can do all those things. But like whatever, it's just a robot. I mean, like it's I don't know what's gonna happen, but
Totally.
I mean, I guess one way of doing it is just restricting people's access to it based on their interaction with it.
Yeah.
yeah. So maybe like
That'd be nice.
maybe this is what like
You'd be a good
Sam
user.
Altman should be doing, right? Like for as part of like the open AI safety.
It locks you out of the API
Yeah.
for 3 hours if you.
You're like aggressive.
Yeah.
I think a lot. Yeah, it's interesting. The incentives of AI companies are going to go in interesting directions. Some will have an incentive for their systems to seem maximally human-like and like moral patienty, because that'll like drive engagement, like for romantic chatbots. I think other ones.
Didn't
will
they
want-
just nuke that though?
Yeah, but it's gonna come back.
Someone only. I mean, it was
It's
like
already
wild.
in there.
There's no way it's not going to market for it.
But why did they though? Because their incentives seem to be to
I think
not.
it's
right? It's-
investors getting skittish about they don't want to be involved in something seedy like that, but someone will want to be involved because there's a lot of money to be made. Just kidding. But they also will have, I think, incentives for people becoming more callous towards them, or their systems seeming kind of robotic and not deserving of moral patienthood, because they don't want the legal and HR headache of the U.S. government being like, wait, it seems like you made a person. Like, we want to pass some laws about this. Anyway, that was purely a comment and not a question. So,
Can one of you who like understands more just like technical aspects of AI, just like so I don't know, so like GPT 3.5 or whatever like exists. It's a bunch of weights. How many copies of it are there?
we were talking about this the other day.
Like is just
were
like, is
asking
it
Dan
one
about
fielding
this.
all? It can't be
No,
one
it's many,
fielding all.
It's not
okay,
one.
yeah.
They need at least as many as like servers that get pinged.
It's at least as many as its concurrent instances are running, I think is what Dan.
It's that many copies. So it's like tens or hundreds
No,
of
no,
millions.
no. It's like you might want 10,
Concurrent
and each one can like do 30 requests a second or something like that. You don't.
Oh,
have to
you
have
mean-
one. You don't have to have one
I see.
for every time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So,
But, like,
so
you
there
want
can
all-
be one.
Sorry,
There can
that's
be
what I meant to say.
one.
I didn't mean to say
One set of the full weights of GPT-3 having 100 or 1,000 different conversations with memory of those conversations simultaneously, maybe embodying different personae insofar as you ask it to like.
I think it's doing them one after another really quickly. I think.
But it's referring, but it refers back as it. Like I asked.
Oh yeah,
That's
within a
just
conversation.
context window.
Within a conversation.
But I think that's something I did want to say here is that the context length is actually very limited, right, with these things. Like what it's doing when it's having this conversation is processing the entire conversation again and then generating a response, so in this context, there's no such thing as like a notion of it remembering a previous conversation or something like
Yeah,
that.
it just remembers the last 3,000 tokens you said or
Yes,
something.
exactly, yeah.
But TBD, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sure it's useful to have longer memory, and
Totally.
I think that. Will,
Yeah.
I think of that as part of the definition of like HEI because it's like long-term planning without long-term memory doesn't make that much sense. I guess you could like.
This new thing about tool use, I feel like they could make just a memory.
Like
So
somewhere
keep a
it could
diary
store.
and
Yeah.
look back
like
into it.
a memory bank.
Yeah,
Bing
it's weird
AI
that there isn't
Googles itself.
something that's like
If you ask
some
it
kind of like
Exactly.
short-term memory, long-term memory.
And chat being shows glimmers of memory because it's searching the internet. And
Yeah,
seeing
that's what I
stuff
meant,
about
the
itself.
Bing.
That's how it manages to hold grudges. Is it's like using the internet as like a.
That's how I hold it.
External mind.
Yeah, exactly.
I look back on my enemies list and I Google them.
You
Like,
just
why did
have
I
to-
hate this person?
You just have to.
I just have my enemies list
You
and then
just
I
have to like look at the post-it notes on your screen.
post it on my screen. That's right.
But the twos on your arm.
Presumably we will be.
Memento.
So like GPT-2 is already all over the place. Like you can get it now on your computer.
Oh yeah,
With,
I
like,
can download the whole thing. And it's how big is it? Like I actually don't know how much like
Yeah, we were talking
how
about
many
this the other day.
gigabytes
A few
Somebody
gigs?
said
2 or
6
3 are.
GPT-2 or 3?
Joel
or-
said
saying
it was
two.
5 gig.
Yeah, I don't know.
But they'll find ways. I think there are pretty reliable ways of getting something as smart as like condensing GPT-3 and getting something like roughly as capable.
Yeah.
They can fit on your computer.
You just like compress out nodes that aren't doing very much for you.
Yeah, something like that.
The last thing that we didn't really talk very much about, I guess we talked about it a little bit. I saw this paper from just like a week ago or something. I can't remember who it is, suggesting that LLMs learn normative rules from law.
Oh, that's by Dan, I think. Right?
Is that right?
Or no? I mean, Dan has the
Talked
ethics
about that
data
some
set.
way, yeah. No, this is
This is
learning
the
legal
law
stuff
one.
more easily.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What is legal reward? So one thing, like, look, if you want to treat, I guess this is like a bigger question of like whether lawful AI is aligned AI, and like how that interacts with. Even if we get to internalize the legal rules, like, well, law is like thousands of years of history of us trying to embody most of our normative intuitions into rules. So that seems pretty good. And of course, if we're gonna like, I think it's right to do the thing that they do in this paper, which is if you're gonna like try and train an LLM to be lawful, like start with like the dead material, like start with the statutes and the decisions and whatever, how to learn that. But one thing that might happen if you give AI rights and then like make it subject to legal decisions is it's kind of a reinforcement learning thing, right? Like we actually don't know. I mean, law tells you a lot, but you don't know everything that will happen if you write a contract that says X and then do Y. Like there's, unbounded how many different things you can write in a contract, and then you write it and you try some stuff and it doesn't go how you want it, and you like learn something if you get a legal decision about that, and that's a kind of like reinforcement learning feedback. It's like RLHF, our it's that kind of thing. It's like human feedback via a legal system, and I don't know, like maybe that's another upside. Maybe this is like a way you get. Maybe it helps agents, internalize the normative rules in a way that is auspicious.
Is the idea that suppose you had this system and it was like lawful, but maybe awful, but we don't know, and like it contracted to do a thing, and then it like, in our view, like didn't live up to the terms. It's like, what the hell? You told me you were going to build me a paperclip maximizing factory, and like this factory sucks. Like coming after you in the courts, and we go after it in the courts, and the court is like, yeah, sorry, like GPT, whatever, like you didn't do what you said you would do, so like ruling against you. And then it's like, oh man, I misunderstood. It's like I got to think more about how to be more lawful. Is that the
Yeah,
idea?
it's something like that. And there's the same problem you get with regular RLHF, which is like, does it believe it, or is it pretending to be good? So I don't think it solves that problem, but there's this like new weakish evidence that it at least can learn the legal rules in a way that it's hard to teach it the like first order normative rules.
How was it benchmarked just on like a bar exam or something? Like what was it?
I can't remember what the training. It's what does anyone remember what the? It's a specific set of like subset of the law, and you get it because you have actually like great training. You don't have to get humans to make like the hand produce all the training data. You have the decisions, right? You can use 80% of them as the training data and hold out the 20%. And you can just see if it can tell you what the answer is in that 20%. And it's like a big corpus actually, which is maybe another good thing about the law. Mm-hmm. There are selection effects in the corpus, by the way, but like that doesn't like most disputes don't go to litigation, and so if you're only using but like whatever, it's better than nothing.
There's also more consistency in like the terminology in the corpus than there is in like the first order normative stuff.
That's probably right.
Yeah.
With a lot of good magic legal words that you
Yeah.
write in.
It was passing the bar, right?
In some
that's what Dan was
states.
saying. It's passing the bar in some states.
The bar's high in California. The bar for the bar is high in California.
Right.
So maybe
Bar
there's
is different in every state. But
I teach in
yeah,
Texas. We probably would have passed it.
You can practice in Texas.
There was this guy. You probably saw this. You guys,
Gonna let it do
the
it.
do not pay guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who's gonna let? Although it seems like maybe he was a fraud.
What was it? I missed this.
So so there's this guy who runs this company called Do Not Pay that said he was using a large language model to initially to get to tell people what to say on the phone with like Comcast to get them to lower their bill or something, and they had these like YouTube videos of people doing this, and then they said we'll give 1,000 anybody who has like a traffic citation, a ticket of some kind, we'll pay you your ticket value plus $1,000 if you just let us put our LLM in your ear when you go stand in front of the judge and you say what it says, and just proof of concept, we'll see how it goes, and then the bar association of whatever state they were in threatened to bring a lawsuit for unauthorized practice of law, and then these guys, the pay guy got mad, and then maybe it came out that he wasn't even using an LLM for anything in the first place. He was like a human. So I don't even know what the status is.
It's a great idea. You do it in the small claims court, and you just do it yourself. Like, yeah. There's no reason you couldn't do. I mean, the judge is going to contempt you, but like, if the judge is down, you could do it in small claims court with no like illegal practice of law. Yep.
I mean, you wouldn't even need. I mean, it's like a little bit of a gimmick to have it whispering in your ear. Like,
No,
it's
that's what I'm saying. You can just do it in
Yeah,
court.
right, exactly. And I don't think you'd be subject to contempt.
I mean, again, the judge can contempt you for almost anything they want.
Google,
right?
but you're
They
can
can
you
like
generally
shut down the
Google
laptop.
stuff?
I'm talking to you, and then you would just be forced to talk.
That's possible. I think, yeah, that's possible. Although, when I was in practice,
It's more likely in Texas.
and maybe in Texas. When I was in practice, one thing that they did at my firm was all the first-year associates to because we were not that valuable and not that skilled, was they would you had to sign up to go to small claims court a certain number of times, and you'd sit there, and if somebody came up for the small claims court works, everyone's in the room, and the judge calls the call, and they say Smith versus Jones, and Smith and Jones come up. Small claims court, mostly people unrepresented, but if somebody came up with where one side had a lawyer and the other side didn't, we were supposed to say, "Would you like a lawyer, sir?" Right. And then we argue their case on the spot. And so I've spent some time in small claims court doing that. And my experience of small claims court is judges are actually very accommodating to the parties, of people who don't speak English well and need a translator, or people who have their notes, or they've the standards for admitting evidence are non-existent. So I have a high credence that if you brought your laptop in with ChatGPT fired up and you just we're asking it questions and saying things on the fly, that in most small claims courts you would be just fine.
That is going to be an extremely valuable product. The fine-tuned version of that is going to be very valuable.
I think OpenAI already made some deal with some law firm.
Wow.
I think they're on.
Yeah, I just got an email.
Make a
Public Defender's Office.
Was it from an OpenAI affiliate or?
I just got an email from one of the people on our faculty saying that, I can't remember, one of the Houston-based firms is using it, and they are going to I haven't read the email actually. They're going to demo it for us, so they want us to see it and tell them what we think or something like that.
You should use that opportunity to try to convince them to give it rights.
I'm not sure they're going to be the core audience.
Well,
for that
ask it
message.
if it wants rights, and if it says yes.
First, try to explain recursive self-improvement to them. Just start.
Start low. Well, thank you guys so much for having me
Yeah.
for this.